I thought I was buying shelter. Then that old wheel seemed to know my family.
No lease, no room, no place to return to. Just a canvas tool roll and $37 she had hidden inside the lining of her winter coat. And with that money, she bought a $3 jet gemstone polisher's studio beneath a forgotten brick building in Salem, Essex County, Massachusetts, erased from tax maps in 1971. The cellar roof leaked along its eastern wall. A black water stood beneath the warped pine floor. Essex County condemned the rooms in October 2021 and marked them for demolition the following spring. But inside the hollow wooden hub of an enormous leather buffing wheel, unopened for generations, waited money, carved black lockets, and a history that would alter what Rosa believed could be inherited. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Rosa Calder had been polishing her whole life without knowing it. As a child in Peabody, she polished whatever adults had stopped noticing. Tarnished drawer pulls, cloudy stones from the river, an old brass button she found beneath a radiator. She liked the moment when dirt surrendered without the object becoming new. Newness did not interest her. What interested her was finding what had remained underneath. Her mother, Elena, worked the evening desk at a nursing home and measured security in envelopes: rent, groceries, electricity, emergency. She loved Rosa with a worried practicality, always touching the edge of a bill before spending it. Art was permitted at the kitchen table. A life built around it was another matter. The exception was Great-Aunt Miriam Calder. Every other Saturday, Miriam collected Rosa in a green Buick that smelled faintly of peppermint and jeweler's rouge and drove her to a narrow workshop behind her house in Gloucester. Miriam made mourning jewelry, though by then few customers called it that. She worked in jet, the black fossilized wood once cut into brooches, beads, lockets, and rings for people who wanted grief made small enough to carry. Rosa learned first by sweeping. Jet dust was too fine to treat carelessly. Miriam dampened the bench before brushing it, kept polishing compounds in separate tins, and made Rosa wash her hands before touching unfinished pieces. Later came the bow saw, the small files, the carving gravers, and finally the leather wheel. Miriam showed her how too much pressure could heat jet until its surface dulled, how rouge should be offered sparingly, and how a final polish was done with patience rather than force. On winter afternoons, they drank tea from mismatched cups while the treadle wheel slowed beside them. "Never polish away what proves it survived," Miriam once said. Rosa understood only the instruction then. Leave the tool mark that belongs, soften damage without erasing age. Years later, the sentence would become harder to separate from people. Miriam died when Rosa was 19, after a short illness that emptied the workshop faster than death itself had emptied the chair. A distant cousin handled the estate. The benches were sold, the tools divided, the old jet stock bundled into auction lots. By the time Rosa learned what had happened, even Miriam's treadle wheel was gone. She kept only the canvas tool roll Miriam had given her at 16. 6 years later, on September 9, 2022, Rosa came home from her job repairing costume jewelry to find the front door of her Salem apartment building propped open with a concrete block. The developer had arrived. His name was Everett Sloan, though Rosa had heard it first from a notice taped beside the mailboxes. He wore a charcoal raincoat even when the day was dry and spoke with the calm impatience of someone for whom other people's rooms were already numbers on a spreadsheet. His company had bought the building that week. Renovations, he said, would begin immediately. No shouting followed. That made it worse. Men with clipboards moved through the hallway measuring doors while tenants stood beside laundry baskets and grocery bags. Sloan never raised his voice. He merely repeated that the property was changing use, that accommodations had been made where possible, and that everyone needed to cooperate. Rosa had received no legal notice. 3 days later, she returned from work and found her mattress folded in the alley dumpster. One corner was dark from rain. Beside it lay a blue ceramic bowl her mother had given her when she first moved out, broken cleanly into 4 pieces. Rosa climbed into the dumpster and recovered them one by one while Sloan stood beneath the fire escape holding a folder against his chest. She asked where she was supposed to sleep. He answered with 8 words. "You were informed. This building is no longer yours." Her mother came before dark in the nursing home uniform she had worn since Rosa was 11. Rosa expected the old instinct. Open the car door, clear the passenger seat, make room. Elena looked at the boxes stacked on the curb, then she looked toward the apartment windows. Her new husband had already said Rosa could not stay with them. Rosa knew this because her mother folded both hands around her car keys instead of unlocking the doors. Neither woman argued. Elena gave her $80 from an envelope in her purse, touched Rosa's cheek once, and drove away before the streetlights came on. For 6 weeks, Rosa learned the geography of places where a person could disappear without technically trespassing. She slept 2 nights in a 24-hour laundromat in Lynn until an attendant began locking the restroom after midnight. In Beverly, she dozed upright in the bus station with Miriam's tool roll strapped beneath her coat. She spent 4 nights behind a friend's ceramics studio in Marblehead, leaving before customers arrived because the landlord forbade anyone from living there. Her money diminished in exact, humiliating increments. A bus fare, coffee purchased to earn 3 hours indoors, $6 for a shower at a gym, $12 for a thrift store blanket after rain soaked the first one. The $80 became $51, then $43. She stopped buying breakfast. At night, she counted what remained beneath the light of convenience store signs and kept Miriam's tools separate from everything else. Clothes could be abandoned. The blanket could be replaced. The roll of gravers, files, and worn polishing sticks never left her body while she slept. By late October, she had $37. Cold rain came off Salem Harbor for 3 straight days. Rosa spent the 3rd afternoon inside the Salem Public Library, choosing a chair near a radiator and pretending to read newspapers until feeling returned to her fingertips. On a wooden rack near the reference desk was a county surplus circular. Most of the listings were useless to her. Drainage parcels, tax liens, strips of land without road access. Then, she saw 6 lines beneath the heading, Structures for Disposal. Seller Workshop. Former jewelry trade used. Condemned purchaser assumes all repairs. Salem, Essex County, minimum sealed bid, $3. Rosa read the notice twice, then a 3rd time. At the reference desk, she asked for the parcel record. The librarian, a silver-haired man wearing 1 hearing aid, brought her a folder of copied deeds and an assessor's photograph so old that the edges of the building disappeared into shadow. In the photograph, barely visible behind a dirty window, stood a wheel. Not a grinding wheel, a leather polishing wheel. Rosa leaned closer until her breath touched the plastic sleeve. The central hub was broad, wooden, and dark with age. Her great-aunt had once worked a wheel built exactly that way. The sealed bid deadline was 4 o'clock. It was 2:17. Rosa folded the classified notice along its existing crease, placed Miriam's tool roll into her backpack, and walked into the rain with $37 to her name. By sunset, 3 of them belonged to a forgotten cellar, and somewhere inside that cellar, a wheel had been waiting longer than Rosa had been alive. At 6 the next morning, Rosa boarded a northbound bus with her backpack between her boots and the county receipt folded inside Miriam's tool roll. The route itself covered barely 12 miles, but the final transfer never came. A driver in Beverly explained that weekend service had been cut beyond the main corridor, so Rosa walked the remaining 7.5 miles through a November rain that hardened towards sleet by dusk. That night, she slept in the loft of an unused hay barn near Wenham, wrapped in her thrift store blanket while the temperature dropped to 31 degrees. She woke before sunrise because a mouse was working inside the wall. By 9, she was walking again. Salem appeared gradually rather than all at once. Wet brick, narrow streets, church steeples lifting through low cloud, then storefronts opening one by one as the morning settled into itself. She passed Crosby's Marketplace, a Walgreens glowing too brightly against the gray, a small Dunkin' already crowded near the windows, a florist unloading white chrysanthemums, and an Ace Hardware where galvanized buckets hung from hooks beneath the awning. She noticed the hardware store. A person without a roof begins noticing roofs. The Essex County Property Office occupied 2 rooms and a municipal annex with terrazzo floors and radiators that clicked like cooling metal. Rosa stood inside the entrance long enough for rainwater to gather beneath her boots before approaching the counter. Behind it sat a woman with white hair cut bluntly at the jaw and tortoiseshell glasses attached to a narrow brass chain. The nameplate read, Margaret Bell Deputy Clerkmers. Bell looked at Rosa, then at the damp envelope containing the winning bid notice. You are Rosa Calder. Yes, ma'am. The clerk did not smile. She opened a file nearly 2 inches thick and placed 4 yellow tabs along its edge. You understand the structure has been condemned? Yes, ma'am. You understand there is no active heat? Yes, ma'am. You understand the lower rooms take water after prolonged rain? Yes, ma'am. You understand the county will not reimburse you for repairs, injury, loss, collapse, or anything you discover after transfer. Rosa rested both hands on the counter. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Bell studied her for several seconds, then she removed the tabs. The deed consisted of 6 pages, each requiring initials where the county abandoned one responsibility after another. Rosa read every line. When she reached the final signature, Mrs. Bell turned a brass embossing stamp toward herself, aligned the paper carefully, and pressed down with both hands. The seal entered the page with a dry metallic crunch. $3 changed ownership. Mrs. Bell gave Rosa 1 receipt, 1 key on a paper tag, and directions written in blue ink. Take Essex Street East, turn toward Derby, then cut inland at the old brick warehouse row. You will see a narrow service lane past the second stone wall. Do not follow the modern parcel number. The entrance faces the older alley. Rosa folded the directions. Mrs. Bell did not release the deed. Her thumb remained over the surname. Calder, she said. Rosa looked up. Was Miriam Calder related to you? For a moment the room seemed to become smaller. My great-aunt, Mrs. Bell, leaned back. The brass chain on her glasses tightened slightly. She repaired my mother's mourning brooch. Rosa said nothing. It was jet. Oval, carved ivy around the edge. Mrs. Bell touched 2 fingers to the hollow beneath her throat. My mother broke the pin stem in 1986. Every jeweler she asked wanted to replace the entire back with modern findings. Miriam refused. That sounded like her. Mrs. Bell opened a lower drawer and removed a small index card, yellowed at the corners. Miriam wrote the repair instructions herself. We kept old vendor records longer than anyone needed. The card bore Miriam's handwriting. Rosa recognized the narrow capital M before she even read the name. Calder, Miriam. Jet. Mourning goods. Special repairs. Below it was an address, not Gloucester, Salem. Rosa compared the street number with the deed. They matched. She worked there? Before Gloucester, apparently. Mrs. Bell's voice had softened. My predecessor said that cellar had polishing rooms going back generations. I never knew your family had any connection until I saw your bid. Rosa looked again at the brass key. It had seemed anonymous 5 minutes earlier. Now it felt heavier. Mrs. Bell finally slid the deed across the counter. For what it is worth, she said, I am glad the county did not sell it for bricks. Outside, the rain had thinned. Rosa followed Essex Street until the shops gave way to older brick, then turned toward Derby Street where the air carried salt from the harbor. Past a stone wall, she found the service lane exactly where Mrs. Bell had described it, squeezed between 2 properties as if the city had nearly forgotten to leave space for it. An elderly man was raking wet leaves beside a white clapboard house. His brown dog watched Rosa without barking. You looking for the old polishing place? The man asked. Rosa stopped. Yes. He nodded toward the lane, past the walnuts. Roof looks worse than it is. The dog sneezed. That was the entire conversation. 2 black walnut trees stood beyond the wall, their bare branches spread over the lane. Beneath them sat a low brick structure attached to the rear of a taller building, perhaps 28 feet long and 16 feet wide. The brick had darkened almost purple with age. A slate roof sagged slightly near the eastern gutter. 1 chimney rose from the rear corner, capped crookedly with rusted sheet metal. Above the door hung a wooden sign. Most of the paint had vanished. Rosa could still make out 3 words: Calder and Sons Jet Polishers. She stood beneath it for nearly a minute. Miriam had never mentioned Sons. The key resisted at first. Rosa pushed her shoulder against the door while turning it, and the swollen wood broke free with a sound like someone clearing a long unused throat. Cold air met her. Not outdoor cold. cellar cold. The front room smelled of wet brick, coal dust, old leather, and stagnant water carrying the faint mineral odor of pennies held too long in a closed hand. Her boot crossed the threshold and pressed into grit. Somewhere inside, water dripped at an exact interval, 7 seconds, then 7 again. She left the door open for light. The front room had once been a receiving area. A scarred counter ran along one wall, its surface bowed in the center. Shelves stood empty except for a chipped porcelain cup and a small nest built from string, straw, and something that looked like horsehair. Rosa touched the counter. The wood felt colder than stone. The back room was different. Even in shadow she could see the wheel. It stood nearly shoulder-high on an iron frame driven by a broad treadle and leather belt gone stiff with age. The polishing surface itself was layered leather, dark brown at the edges and almost black where decades of rouge had entered the grain. Rosa stepped closer. Her sleeve brushed a hanging belt. A dry powder fell. She smelled iron, mold, and beneath both of them something unmistakable, jeweler's rouge. Her hand stopped in the air. Miriam's workshop returned through smell alone. Saturday rain on the windows, the slow creak of the treadle, tea cooling beside a tin of compound. Rosa did not touch the wheel, not yet. She inspected the rest of the room before daylight failed. One workbench remained anchored to the wall. A cracked sink had no running water. The floor dipped toward a black puddle near the eastern bricks. When she tested the chimney cleanout, the iron door came away in her hand. By 5, the building was dark. She owned 3 candles. She lit one. For supper, she ate half a peanut butter sandwich saved from the library cafe and drank water from the bottle she had filled that morning. The candle stood inside the chipped porcelain cup because she had nothing else broad enough to catch wax. There was no lock on the inside of the door. Rosa solved that with a length of abandoned drive belt threaded through the latch and tied around the leg of the receiving counter. She spread her blanket on the driest section of front room floor. Brick drew heat from her body even through 2 layers of clothing. Every time the wind moved over the chimney, something loose above her clicked 3 times. She counted those sounds for an hour, then stopped. Near midnight, rain began again. Rosa woke to water tapping into a metal pan somewhere in the back room. She sat up. Through the open doorway, moonlight caught one narrow curve of the great polishing wheel. Nothing moved. Still, she could not shake the sense that the room contained work interrupted rather than work abandoned. She lay back down with Miriam's tool roll beneath her head. The building smelled terrible. Her clothes were damp. She had $34 left, no working stove, no safe water, and a roof the county had already decided was not worth saving. But nobody could put her mattress in a dumpster here. Rosa closed her eyes. Grief, when polished, becomes a dark and enduring beauty. For the first 3 days, Rosa treated the studio as if it were an injured animal. She did not begin with repair. She began by learning where not to step. The well stood beyond the walnut trees beneath a leaning pump handle that took 17 strokes before brown water cleared to cold, iron-tasting clarity. The outhouse had lost one hinge, so she tied its door with clothesline. Inside the studio, she memorized every floorboard by sound. The long groan beside the receiving counter, the dry pop near the back wall, and one dangerous silence where a plank had rotted almost completely through. On the 4th morning, she walked back toward town for supplies. The Ace Hardware she had noticed on arrival was narrower inside than it appeared from the street. It smelled of machine oil, cedar shavings, fertilizer, and the bitter metallic dust that collects around bins of loose fasteners. The owner stood behind the counter sharpening a carpenter's pencil with a pocket knife. His left ear was missing its upper edge. "Morning," he said. Rosa placed her county deed on the counter, because she had learned that people took documents more seriously than explanations. "I bought the old Calder polishing shop." The knife stopped. "That cellar?" "Yes." He looked at her coat, her worn boots, then the deed. "You have tools?" "Some. Money. Not much. That makes 2 problems." His name was Walter Finch. Rosa showed him her list: chimney brush, stovepipe screws, lamp oil, work gloves, lime, nails, a bucket, rope. Walter read it without comment. Then he turned the paper over. "You need credit? I need not to freeze before I earn any." One corner of his mouth moved. "That is a better answer." He opened a ruled account book beneath the register. No interest for 60 days. You pay something each week even if it is 50 cents. I see you stop trying. Account closes, I understand. He wrote Calder in block letters. Before Rosa left, he added a battered paperback to the box. Home repair for old buildings, the cover had been taped twice. Free, he said, because no one should learn chimneys from guessing. Her purchases came to less than $20. A 6-inch wired chimney brush for $4.85, 50 feet of sash cord for $2.10, a galvanized bucket for $1.35, 2 pounds of cut nails for $1.80, lamp oil for 79 cents, and a pair of leather gloves marked down to $2.25. Walter wrote every price into the ledger. Rosa walked home carrying the box against her chest. The chimney took the rest of that day and most of the next. She removed the loose sheet metal cap first, working from a short borrowed ladder with one boot braced against the brick. Then she tied the chimney brush to the new rope, lowered it through the flue, and worked it up and down in short strokes rather than forcing it. The first pass released soot. The second released flakes. The third brought down creosote in hard black scales that struck the firebox like pieces of broken pottery. She spread newspaper beneath the cleanout and kept brushing, 6 hours. Then 8. At hour 9, the rope burned a line across her palm through the glove. She stopped only long enough to wrap it. By late afternoon of the second day, the brush passed through without catching. She held a mirror inside the cleanout and angled it toward the top until a pale square of sky appeared. Only then did she make a fire. 3 twisted sheets of newspaper. Dry splinters shaved from an abandoned crate. 2 pieces of hardwood no thicker than her wrist. Rosa lit the paper and watched the flame climb. Smoke hesitated, then it pulled upward, cleanly. She stood there with both hands on her knees until the first real warmth entered the brick around the stove. That evening, she boiled well water for 12 minutes, cooked oats in a dented saucepan Walter had found beneath his counter, and stirred in 1 spoonful of peanut butter. It was the first hot meal she had eaten in 9 days. The next morning, she began the workroom. Not cleaning, inventory. The bench held a cast-iron vise with leather-covered jaws, a row of wooden-handled gravers gone orange with surface rust, 2 shallow brass trays stained red with rouge, a bow saw with 1 broken horn, 3 slate templates cut into oval locket shapes, a hand drill, and a small balance scale whose weights still sat nested in their velvet-lined box. On a shelf beneath the window rested 7 pieces of raw jet. Rosa picked up 1, light, warm almost immediately in her palm. Not glass, not cold jet. She rubbed an edge against unglazed porcelain from the broken sink. A brown-black streak appeared. Miriam had taught her that test before she was trusted with a blade. Rosa returned the piece exactly where she found it. Then she approached the wheel. Up close, the machine was larger than memory had made it. The leather polishing rim was nearly 4 feet across, built in compressed layers around a thick wooden center. A foot treadle drove a flywheel below, which turned the upper wheel by belt. The frame had been bolted directly into the masonry floor. Rosa pressed the treadle, nothing. She removed the belt. The wheel moved a quarter turn with a low complaint from the bearings. She stopped, tapped the rim with 1 knuckle. Dents tapped the hub solid oak. She moved around it. Tapped again. The note changed. Rosa waited. Then struck the same place with the wooden handle of a file. Toque, 6 inches to the right, tonk hollow. She crouched. The hub appeared to be built from laminated wooden sections pinned around an axle. Most were dark with oil, but 1 circular cedar disc near the rear side was slightly lighter than the oak around it. No screw heads, no latch, only a hairline seam. Rosa pressed it. Nothing. She put both hands against the disc and tried turning it. Nothing. Then she remembered something Miriam used to do with old lockets. Never search first for the opening, search for where. Rosa held the candle close. At the lower edge of the cedar disc, the wood had been polished smooth by fingers. She pressed there, a hidden spring released with a dry click. The disc moved outward less than half an inch. Rosa did not pull it open. She sat back on her heels. For several minutes, the only sound in the room was water dripping near the eastern wall. 7 seconds, 7 again. She brought the galvanized bucket beneath the drip, washed her hands, dried them on her coat, and returned. Then she opened the hub. Inside was a cylindrical cavity nearly 18 inches deep. The first thing she saw was cloth, oilcloth, brown with age, tied with cotton tape. Rosa lifted the first package using both hands. Beneath it sat another. Then a small tin box. She carried everything to the workbench and closed the cedar disc before touching any of it. The largest bundle contained tools, not ordinary shop tools. Heirloom tools, 6 gravers wrapped individually in linen. A tiny jeweler's bow saw with an ebony handle. 2 hand-cut steel scrapers, a polishing dog made from brass, calipers engraved with the initials EC. Rosa touched the letters. She did not recognize them. The second bundle contained raw jet, not fragments. Selected stock, 12 pieces, each wrapped in tissue, several large enough for portrait lockets. One had a chalk notation still visible. Good black, no fracture. The handwriting was Miriam's. Rosa stopped breathing for a moment, then she opened the tin box. Money lay beneath a folded envelope. Not modern money. Coins, small canvas rolls, paper packets, loose pieces wrapped in newspaper dated 1947. Rosa did not unfold the letter. She placed it beneath the scale weight box and began counting, procedure first. Miriam had taught her that too. She separated everything by type: Morgan silver dollars, Walking Liberty $half, Mercury dimes, Indian head cents. There were also folded banknotes in envelopes, some brittle enough that Rosa moved them with tweezers. At the bottom lay a military medal suspended from a faded ribbon. A purple heart, engraved on the reverse. Thomas E. Calder 1908. Rosa set it apart. She counted once, then again, then a third time because the total seemed impossible. $28,900. Not an even cash assembled ceremonially, an accumulated amount, saved gradually, hidden deliberately. Beside the money were 14 carved jet lockets. Rosa opened the first. Inside was a tiny photograph of a girl perhaps 7 years old, wearing a white collar and looking away from the camera. The second held 2 boys, the third an infant. Names had been written behind several photographs. Dates, too. 19. Rosa closed each locket after one glance. She knew enough history to understand the dates. Influenza. Children lost during the pandemic. Someone had carved each case by hand, polished the jet until it reflected light like still black water, and placed those small faces inside. Not ornaments, witnesses. She returned them to the cloth. The envelope remained unopened. On its front, written in Miriam's hand, were 4 words. For the one who returns. Rosa sat at the bench until daylight left the window. She could have opened it then. She did not. Instead, she wrapped the money again, placed the medal beside the lockets, and carried the unopened letter into the front room. Outside, the rain had stopped. Rosa walked through the service lane, past the walnut trees, and continued until she could see the dark water beyond the roofs. The harbor moved under a flat November sky. She stood there with the letter inside her coat. Behind her was a condemned studio bought for $3. Inside it lay more money than she had ever possessed, tools marked with names she did not yet know, and photographs of children whose families had once carried them close to the heart. Rosa watched the water until the last light disappeared. She did not open the letter. Some things survived because someone had known when not to disturb them. Grief, when polished, becomes a dark and enduring beauty. Morning entered the studio through one cracked pane and laid a narrow bar of gray light across the workbench. Rosa had slept badly. She boiled water, made weak coffee, and sat with the envelope before her. In daylight, there was no mistaking the handwriting. Miriam's letters leaned slightly forward, each capital deliberate, as if even ink should know where it was going. Rosa slid a thin scraper beneath the flap. The paper opened without tearing. My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this, then the wheel has kept its promise longer than I expected. My name is Miriam Eliza Calder. Dr. Samuel Price at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston tells me the cancer in my pancreas has already traveled to my liver. He says months, perhaps less. I have no reason to quarrel with an honest doctor, so I am putting my remaining strength into making one thing clear. You belong here only if you are willing to work carefully. Our trade began with Elias Calder, born in Salem in 1847, who learned jet cutting from an English carver and opened these rooms in 1873. His daughter Ruth Calder Hale, born 1878, kept the benches after his hands failed. Ruth's daughter, Eleanor Hale Calder, born 1903, carried the work through Gloucester and Salem during hard years when mourning jewelry fell out of fashion. Eleanor taught me, Miriam Calder, born 1938, and I closed the trade on October 14, 1989. Since that day, the wheel has been silent more than 30 years. Do not mistake silence for emptiness. Thomas Edward Calder, my grandfather's younger brother, went to France in the First World War and did not come home. The Purple Heart was awarded later and kept because his mother could not bear to place it in a drawer alone. That is why it rests with the work the lockets belong together. Most were made for families who lost children during the influenza years of 1918 and 1919. Some were never collected. Some were returned because grief changed households faster than bills could be paid. Do not sell them separately. If you decide to work jet, remember this. Warm the rough stock only to room temperature. Never force a cold jet under a blade. Cut slowly and stop if the piece grows hot in your fingers. Mix rouge lightly, about 1 part compound to 4 parts clean oil for the old leather wheel. Polish in brief passes of 15 to 20 seconds, then let the piece cool. Heat is the enemy because jet remembers every careless hand. The money is not treasure. It is unpaid labor, saved wages, war money, repair money, and what remained when people brought us keepsakes but could not always bring payment. Use only what keeps the work alive. Leave something for the person after you. Inheritance is not what you receive, it is what you keep usable. Sharpen the tools. Oil the wood. Repair what can still bear weight. Do not polish away the marks that prove a thing survived. If there is no one after you, leave the door ready anyway. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Miriam Eliza Calder, November 3, 1997. Rosa reached the bottom and did not move. The stove clicked softly behind her. She read the letter again. The second reading was slower. When she finished, she aligned the old folds exactly as Miriam had made them and pressed each crease flat with the side of her thumb. Then she returned the letter to its envelope. Not because she was finished with it, but because it deserved to keep its shape. One sentence would not leave her. Do not polish away the marks that prove a thing survived. Rosa carried the letter through the back room and opened the rear door. Beyond it, under leaves gathered against the foundation, she found a narrow slate path she had assumed was drainage stone. It led 12 paces toward the older walnut tree. There, half buried beside the trunk, stood a granite marker no higher than her knee. She cleared away wet leaves. Calder work kept. Here, 1873 and 1989. Beneath the dates was a small carved symbol, an oval crossed by 3 short polishing lines. Rosa traced the grooves. Lichen had softened their edges but not erased them. Back inside, she chose one object from the hidden bundle, a brass jeweler's lamp. Its reservoir still held the sour residue of ancient oil. Rosa cleaned it with a rag, trimmed a replacement wick, filled it from Walter's bottle, and struck a match. The flame began blue, then yellow. It steadied beneath the little brass hood and cast a warm circle across the scarred workbench. For the first time, the room looked occupied, not restored. Occupied. Rosa began remembering the small things people had done without being asked. The silver-haired librarian who brought the parcel records and never questioned why she stayed near the radiator for hours. Mrs. Bell, who kept Miriam's old vendor card and pressed the deed with both hands as though $3 still deserved ceremony. The elderly neighbor by the service lane whose only kindness had been 4 useful words about the roof. Walter, who opened a credit ledger for a homeless woman he had known less than 10 minutes, and then gave her a repair manual because guessing could get someone killed. None of them had rescued her. That was why the gestures mattered. They had only moved one obstacle aside. Sometimes one obstacle was enough. Before we go farther, think of one small kindness someone once gave you when they did not have to. Maybe it was a ride, a meal, a place to sit, a tool lent without asking when it would come back. Tell us about it in the comments. Small kindnesses are often the things people remember longest. That night, Rosa moved the heirloom tools from the workbench to the front room. She wrapped the gravers again, placed the brass calipers beside them, and set Miriam's letter beneath the canvas tool roll she had carried through 6 homeless weeks. The Purple Heart remained inside its cloth. The lockets remained closed. Rosa slept on the floor with 4 generations of tools beside her and the old jeweler's lamp extinguished within reach. The first snow came on December 3rd. 7 inches settled over the slate before dawn, filling the sag near the eastern gutter until Rosa could see exactly where the roof carried weight badly. She stood in the lane with Walter's repair manual open beneath her coat and read the roofing chapter 3 times before climbing a ladder. The roof measured roughly 28 by 16 feet. Allowing for pitch, waste, and overlap, she'd calculated 14 squares of shingles, 2 rolls of felt, and just over 20 pounds of roofing nails. Walter read the figures once. "You are short a hatchet." He disappeared into the back room and returned with one whose steel head had been sharpened nearly silver. "My brother's. He roofed 30 years. Rosa tried to hand it back. Walter closed her fingers around the handle. At noon, a thin man named Amos Pike appeared beside the ladder. He had been a roofer before arthritis bent 2 fingers permanently inward. "I hear you are rebuilding alone. I am paying what I can. I did not ask." He refused money. For 11 days, Amos showed her what the manual could not. They sistered 1 weakened rafter with straight fir, bolted beyond the rod on both sides. Rosa snapped chalk lines so each shingle course would stay true. Amos taught her the 3-stroke nail technique: set, drive, finish. On the 3rd morning, he pointed with one crooked finger that nail's proud. Rosa lifted the hatchet. Pull it. She did. By December 15th, the last ridge piece was fixed. Snowmelt ran down both slopes without finding the rooms below. Rosa climbed down after sunset, her knees trembling from 11 days on ladders. Amos stood in the lane, looked once at the roof, and put on his cap. Good enough to grow old under. That was all he said. January exposed what December had hidden. The chimney bricks began shedding their faces during a hard freeze. Rosa found thin red shells on the floor each morning, and when she pressed a mortar joint with her thumb, part of it crumbled into powder. Walter told her not to use modern Portland cement. Too hard, old brick needs somewhere to move. She mixed hydraulic lime with sand for the exterior joints and used a fire clay-rich mortar inside the hot section, roughly 1 part fire clay to 3 parts clean masonry. Sand with lime worked in only enough for plasticity. The work took 3 weeks. Temperatures stayed mostly in the 20s. Rosa learned to keep 2 pairs of gloves near the stove because wet mortar made cloth useless, but delicate pointing around the old brick required bare fingertips. Every 15 minutes her hands went numb. She would go inside, hold them near the stove until pain returned, then climb again. She removed loose mortar only as deep as it had failed. No farther. She misted the joints before repointing so the old brick would not steal moisture too quickly. Each new section was protected from overnight freezing with burlap and a loose wind cover. By late January, the chimney no longer shed red dust. Rosa built a small test fire. Smoke rose through the flue without spilling into the room. She added another split of wood. The draft strengthened. Outside, a narrow gray column lifted cleanly above the roof. Rosa watched it until the wood caught fully, then closed the stove door and returned her frozen gloves to the hearth. The floors looked worse once the walls stopped leaking. Years of coal dust, standing water, and grit had turned the white pine planks nearly black. Some could be saved. 3 near the eastern wall could not. Rosa found reclaimed white pine close enough in width to match the originals and fixed the replacements with hand-cut rosehead nails so the new boards would not announce themselves from across the room. Then she rented a random orbit sander. $14 a day. She made 3 passes. 80 grit removed the damaged surface. 120 softened the scratches. 220 prepared the grain for oil. The work filled every seam with pale dust. Rosa vacuumed twice, wiped the boards carefully, then laid down the first thin oil coat with a rag and worked backward toward the door. 3 coats, 48 hours of cure before furniture returned. The change surprised her. Under soot, the pine had held a dark honey color. With oil, the oldest boards deepened toward mahogany, where generations of boots had compressed the grain. One morning, she did nothing. She woke before daylight, dressed for work, and carried the sander cord into the front room, then stopped. Her hands shook when she tried to plug it in. Rosa put the cord down. She walked toward the marsh instead. A great blue heron stood in shallow water between pale winter reeds, motionless except for the wind lifting feathers along its back. Rosa watched for almost an hour. The bird took one step, then another. No hurry. She stayed there until noon and did not touch the floor that day. The next morning she returned. No punishment, no apology. She finished the final oil coat before sunset. There were 8 windows, 3 had no glass, 4 were cracked. One still held an original hand-blown pane, wavy and faintly green, dated by the building survey to 1788. Rosa did not replace it. She protected that pane first. The other openings came apart one sash at a time. She scraped loose glazing without forcing the old wood, bedded replacement glass in a thin layer of DAP 33 glazing putty, set the points carefully, then tooled the outer putty into a clean bevel that would shed rain. The sash cords were worse. Most had rotted inside the weight pockets. Rosa replaced them with a 1/4-inch cotton sash cord, lowering each counterweight by hand before securing the line with a figure-8 knot that could tighten under load without slipping. She worked from the worst window to the best. By the 7th, her fingers knew the sequence. Remove, dot clean, bed, point, glaze, cord balance. The last window was in the back room beside the polishing wheel. Rosa had just seated the lower sash when a chickadee landed on a bare walnut branch outside. It faced the glass. Rosa froze with the putty knife still in her hand. The bird hopped once, tilted its head, then flew toward the lane. Rosa pressed the sash gently upward. It stayed where she left it. For the first time in decades, the window opened and closed under its own balance. The plaster defeated Rosa 3 times. Near the chimney, old horsehair plaster had separated from hand-split oak lath, and each repair she attempted cracked as it dried. The first mix was too wet. The second dried too quickly beside the stove. The third held for a day, then opened a thin gray line overnight. Walter brought her an old feed sack. My father saved this for plaster. Inside was clean horsehair, coarse and pale. Rosa mixed lime plaster slowly, worked the hair through the scratch coat and pressed it firmly between the oak laths until small keys formed behind them. She scored the surface before it hardened. Next came a 3/8-inch brown coat. She waited 72 hours. Then she laid a finish coat barely 1/8 inch thick and worked it with a damp steel trowel until the repaired wall sat quietly beside the old surface instead of trying to imitate it. The patches remained visible. Slightly. Rosa ran her palm over them. These patches will hold another 100 years. She left them that way. By March, people had stopped asking whether Rosa intended to stay. They began behaving as if she already had. Doris Bellamy owned the small cafe 2 streets from the harbor. She wore red-framed glasses and carried every plate balanced against one hip as though her other hand had forgotten how to work. Twice a week, Rosa found a brown paper bag on the doorstep, soup in a jar, bread wrapped in waxed paper. Once, 2 boiled eggs and an orange. Rosa finally carried money to the cafe. Doris pushed it back across the counter with one flour-marked finger. "Pay me in candles when the shop reopens." Rosa had never said she was reopening anything. Doris turned away before she could answer. Caleb arrived on a blue Schwinn one Saturday morning. He was 16, perhaps 17, with one trouser cuff caught in a metal bicycle clip and a splitting maul balanced across his handlebars. Without introduction, he dismounted beside the woodpile. "Walter said you split wrong." Rosa looked at the maul. "Walter talks too much." Caleb smiled once, then he spent 4 hours showing her how to read checks in the grain before swinging. When Rosa offered him $2, he refused, my mother said. About your grandfather. He would not explain further. He rode home before supper with the maul across his shoulder. Reverend Boyd passed each morning at almost the same hour. He was a narrow man with silver eyebrows so long they lifted in the wind. He never entered unless invited. He simply tipped his hat as Rosa worked. One bitter morning, when ice had formed inside the pump spout and nothing in the studio seemed willing to cooperate, he stopped at the gate. Rosa looked exhausted. He lowered his head. keep this house standing, thought 4 words, then he walked on. Rosa postponed the cellar until February 11th. She had known it existed because the rear floor held an iron ring beneath a warped plank. But roofs, heat, and windows had come first. The hatch opened over 7 granite steps. Below them lay a 12 by 15-foot room floored in uneven fieldstone. The air smelled dry. That surprised her. At the center stood a dressed granite slab, unlike the rough stones around it. Carved into its surface was the same oval craft mark Rosa had found on the marker beneath the walnut tree. She brushed dust from the symbol. She did not lift the slab. Some closed things had earned the right to remain closed until there was a reason. Under the 3rd stair, however, her hand found wood. A small oak box had been wedged so tightly behind the riser that she needed a thin pry bar to work it free. Inside lay a brass key. Its bow had been shaped into the same oval and 3-line symbol used by the old Calder trade. Beneath it was a tintype. Rosa carried it upstairs for better light. The photograph showed a young woman standing outside the studio in summer, one hand resting on the doorway and the other holding a bow saw. Rosa stared at the face, the nose, the chin, even the slight inward turn of the left shoulder. It was like seeing herself through imperfect glass. On the back, written in faded ink, Ruth Calder Hale, daughter of Alice, age 25, summer of 1903. Rosa placed the photograph beside Miriam's letter. The brass key went on the mantel. She tried it in no lock, not yet. Snow withdrew from the lane in dirty ridges. The creek beyond the lower road became loud enough to hear before sunrise, and by April the walnut branches had lengthened with green catkins that scattered yellow dust across the repaired sill. Rosa did not begin jet carving, not fully. She had restored enough to understand that possession was not permission to rush. She selected one ordinary silver dollar from the cache and exchanged it carefully, using only part of its value for polishing compound saw blades, fine abrasives, and small practice stock. She worked on scraps nothing larger than a thumbnail. She learned the pressure of Miriam's old gravers before trusting them with anything precious. Some days she produced only black dust. That was still work. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Rosa finished her first complete piece. She had spent 9 days carving it. Not a mourning portrait, not a replica. A small oval locket cut from old stock Miriam had marked good black. No fracture. Rosa worked the border as ivy, leaving one tiny tool mark beneath a leaf where her graver had slipped on the second morning. Years earlier, she would have corrected it until nothing remained. She left it. At the leather wheel, she mixed rouge lightly and polished in brief passes, never more than 20 seconds before letting the jet cool. On the final evening, the black surface took a light, not like glass. Deeper, the locket seemed to hold brightness beneath darkness rather than reflect it. Rosa stopped the treadle with her foot. Silence entered slowly. The studio had changed around her without becoming new. The pine floor still showed dents beneath the receiving counter. The old plaster patches near the chimney remained faintly visible. 8 windows worked properly, though the 1788 pane still bent the view of the walnut tree into soft waves. Miriam's brass lamp stood on the bench. Walter's brother's roofing hatchet hung beside the door. Nothing matched perfectly. Everything belonged. The brass key stayed on the mantel until the morning after Christmas. A storm the previous night had broken a dead limb from the older walnut tree. While clearing it, Rosa noticed a rectangle beneath the bark. Not a natural scar. A brass plate. It had been set into the trunk decades earlier, then nearly swallowed as the tree grew around it. At its center was a keyhole. Rosa went inside. The brass key turned once. The plate released. Behind it lay a narrow cavity lined with tin. Inside was a folded flag. 48 stars. Rosa carried it into the studio before unfolding anything else. Beneath the flag rested a note wrapped in waxed cloth. The date was October 2nd, 1918. The handwriting belonged to Ruth Calder Hale. My Thomas is in France. We have heard nothing for 6 weeks. Mother says we must keep the shop open because grief does not stop work and work does not stop grief. I have placed the flag here because if he comes home, we will hang it. If he does not, I cannot bear to see it folded in a drawer. Whoever finds this, do not mistake our keeping things for our inability to let go. Some things are kept because they still have work to do. Rosa read the note beside the window. Outside, the tree moved slightly in winter wind. She understood then why the Purple Heart had been hidden with the tools rather than displayed. It had never been a decoration. It had remained a part of the family's unfinished work. On November 11th, the following year, Rosa carried Thomas E. Calder's medal to Green Lawn Cemetery in Salem. There was no ceremony. She found the family's stone under bare maples and stood there at 11 in the morning on the anniversary of the armistice that ended the First World War. She laid the medal against the stone for 1 minute, then returned it to its cloth. It belonged to the living, too. Of the money inside the polishing wheel, Rosa used 4 old coins. One had bought her first practice materials. Another paid for replacement leather on the treadle belt. 2 more covered a small batch of sterling findings and archival glass for lockets she intended to make properly rather than cheaply. Everything else remained together. She had a local attorney witness a simple document. The cash was inventoried. The mourning lockets were not divided. Miriam's tools were listed by name where names were known. Across the envelope containing the instructions, Rosa wrote, "For the next one." She sealed it. The shop reopened without an announcement. Doris made sure of that. One morning, Rosa entered the cafe and saw an index card pinned to the corkboard beside piano lessons and a notice for lost gloves. Calder Jet Work Repairs. As small commissions asked, Doris Rosa removed it. Doris put it back. Within 3 months, more than 40 names had accumulated on a handwritten mailing list. Rosa accepted only what she could finish carefully. A cracked mourning brooch, 2 jet beads from a grandmother's necklace, a plain locket commissioned for a woman who wanted to carry a photograph of her sister. No rush orders, no polished display cases. People waited. Most understood. Caleb returned that spring. He was taller and arrived in a pickup instead of on the Schwinn. Across the truck bed lay a long object wrapped in an old quilt. I made something. Rosa helped him carry it inside. It was a sign. He had carved the lettering by hand from walnut darkened with oil. Calder and Daughters Jet Polishers. Rosa read it twice. The old sign says Sons. I noticed. There has never been an and Daughters. Caleb shrugged. There should have been. He had copied the old lettering closely enough that the new words did not look modern. Rosa ran her fingers across the carved ampersand. You take commissions? No. Good. She paid him anyway. He accepted this time. They hung the sign beneath the original, leaving the older board in place above it. One did not need to erase one history to make room for another. That autumn, Rosa began a letter. She used thick paper, not because she expected the next person soon, but because Miriam had understood something Rosa finally did too. Instructions should outlive assumptions. She wrote the opening slowly. My dear one, whoever you are. She described the roof, the chimney, which floorboards still creaked near the receiving counter. She explained where Walter's account ledger had been stored after his retirement, and why the old 1788 window must never be replaced merely because modern glass would be clearer. She wrote that tools should be sharpened before they looked dull. That jet should never be polished hot, that no one should use the hidden money to make the rooms fashionable. Then she stopped. Outside, someone walked through the lane, a customer perhaps, or only a neighbor. Rosa did not look up immediately. She turned Miriam's brass calipers once in her hand and listened to the treadle wheel complete its final slow rotation. Grief, when polished, becomes a dark and enduring beauty. She added one last paragraph. You do not owe the dead your imitation. You owe the work your attention. Leave something usable. Leave the door ready. Rosa folded the letter without sealing it. There was still time to add more. At dusk, she stepped outside beneath the 2 walnut trees. The newer sign moved slightly in the wind below the old one. Warm light from the restored windows crossed the lane in narrow rectangles, distorted beautifully where it passed through the oldest glass. Behind her, the treadle was still. Tomorrow, it would turn again. The Jet Gemstone Polisher's studio waits. It has always waited. Years later, Margaret Bell retired from the county office. On her final afternoon, she emptied the lower drawers of obsolete forms, dried stamp pads, and property files no longer required to exist on paper. At the back of one drawer, she found a small envelope. Inside was a single dollar bill. Rosa had paid for the studio with 3 $1 bills. Margaret had once separated one before depositing the rest because the serial number ended in 1873, the year Elias Calder opened the trade. She had meant to give it to Rosa. She never did. Instead, she placed the envelope back in the drawer for the next clerk. Some things she had learned could wait.